and persecution on the basis of our faith. And I think within the continent of Africa, you're well aware of many of these issues, and we just heard about them from my brother who was talking about some of the really terrible persecution. And in other areas, there are places where there is discrimination. But you also have been hearing about, both those of you who were here yesterday and this morning, Dr. Shanna talked about the prophetic voice, being an advocate, doing advocacy. Well, what is advocacy? People have all kinds of ideas about what advocacy is. Some people think about these kinds of public protests, and Nairobi is no stranger to that, has had some public protests recently, and we're starting to, I think, see more public protests in various countries as people are angry and they're negative and they're not going to take it anymore. But there's another type of advocacy, and that is government relations. That is the prophetic voice to our countries and to our leadership. Next slide. So when we think about advocacy, advocacy as government relations is relational and long-term. It's not a one and done. I had a meeting with this politician and I said this and we're done. It isn't that way. It is, you have to build credibility and trustworthiness over time and come with a solutions-oriented approach in order for people to listen. And as Christian leaders, I'm calling on you to be or to find those who are Esther's. I put on here Esther's and Daniel's, but I have to add Joseph's onto there. People that can engage with government, both political leadership and bureaucratic leadership. Advocacy as calling. I have been called to be an advocate, and I've met others who feel that same calling. When you see an issue, an injustice, a problem, people being persecuted, people who are internally displaced, people who are homeless, you want to rise up and say, we need to do something about this. Those people who feel that way are called to be advocates. And sometimes it is necessary to reach out to those of other faiths, particularly when you're in a region where people of other faiths are also being persecuted. I often have found a door opening to government if we're bringing a multi-faith response to a particular problem or issue. Not always, but sometimes that is helpful if you can find out to people, find other people who share similar enough values or have similar enough experience. Next slide, please. Well, how do you engage in advocacy? I've spent a lifetime working on this and I'm summarizing it on one slide. So I have lots more to say about this, but it is important to think about what you would like the government to do. So you think about a place like Nigeria and you think, oh, wow, there are lots of different issues we could go to government with, but right now the big problem is all those internally displaced persons who have no toilet facilities, shower facilities, bathing for small children. Okay, I'm going to go to government and have one ask, and that is for sanitation for IDP camps. Is that maybe doable, maybe a simple enough ask, and it would make such a difference in those communities. Lots of things I could go for, but maybe, I'm using that as an example. I'm not saying for Nigerians that's the only thing you'd want to go to your government with, but that is something possible. Then are there some people who are engaged on the ground that you could bring to a government official to tell them the story of what's happening. I have always seen our advocacy as Christians to be stronger when it comes out of our practical, on the ground action. And I know that every one of you and your ministries are engaged in that on the ground ministry in so many areas. And out of that comes our voice and come the stories that are going to touch the hearts of the people who make decisions. Now, you also need to have, government works on written documents. They have policy briefs, and they have recommendations and points of action, and those are all templates you can find on the internet. But when you go to government and advocacy, you need to be able to speak their language and use their kind of form. It's like entering into their culture in order to make that difference. Then, how can you develop some relationships? I've always been encouraged by Queen Esther. She knew how to get to the king, invite him for dinner, talk about things when he is relaxed and enjoying dinner. I have a colleague in the Geneva office, and he loves to make dinner for diplomats. And that is such a great way to make relationships. And you wouldn't believe some of the people he has made relationships with. They're not countries that are our friends, but he wants to make friends of them so that he can get their ear and talk to them. I so appreciated this approach of being solutions oriented. We want to try to solve problems. It's important that people recognize what the problem is, but we want to go with a solution to say, you know, you could do this, and that would make a big difference. And then following up with thanks, particularly if they say, yes, I'm going to do that. We need to follow up and make sure they do it and thank them when they do. Next slide, please. But what about marching in the streets? Isn't that important? There is a place for activism, and sometimes we need to show policymakers that there's support for our position. Signing petitions, peaceful demonstrations, letter writing campaigns. The William Wilberforce campaign to end slavery developed a lot of these techniques for activism that we still use today, and they can still be effective. But do make sure that your activism doesn't undermine your message. You don't want people going out angry and shouting and undermining the message of solutions oriented. Next slide, please. Now, is this broader than your country? There are many issues that come up in more than one country. Like you think about all the issues in sub-Saharan Africa, there are many countries that are being impacted by this. So work together. Who does your country listen to? Maybe if your country, your government is not listening to this message, maybe you need to talk to another government, or maybe a national alliance in another government that could help make a difference. There are regional associations, and here we're talking the African Union or the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. Are they dealing with this issue? Could they be a subject of your advocacy? Is there a place for that? Maybe. And how about the United Nations? Can you connect with international NGOs, or maybe, the World Evangelical Alliance, who might be working on this? Next slide, please. So, yes, advertising, you knew it was coming. The WEA, founded in 1846 in over 140 national alliances in 9 regions, representing over 600 million evangelicals across the world. I'm thinking, having just heard the numbers in Africa, we need to inflate our number of 600 million. But what? And we also have, in addition to national alliances, we have ethnic alliance affiliates, church networks. We're part of one large global family. Well, we have had a particular status at the United Nations since 1997. And that gives us a platform to be able to speak to the UN. I have a fancy name tag that gives me, swipe access into UN grounds. In 2012, the WEA founded a liaison office in Geneva to specifically be able to deal with the Human Rights Council and human rights issues. And that's where I work. Next slide, please. Well, the WEA, like many of you, has a strategic plan. And it's called Roadmap 2030. And look, influential voice of advocacy is right in there. That's one of the 4 pillars of the strategic plan. So I'm happy to be working on one of those areas. Next slide, please. So this is a very simplified org chart because it only includes my department of global advocacy. There is a whole bunch of stuff WEA does that is not global advocacy, but I couldn't fit it on an org chart and you still be able to see it. So I gave you a nice circle around how we fit in and where the Geneva office is. So you see that global advocacy includes a New York office, Sustainability Center, and that deals with environmental creation care issues, the Peace and Reconciliation Network, and also the Global Freedom Network, which is an anti-human trafficking arm. So our department deals with a variety of issues, but I'm the Geneva office. Next slide, please. So United Nations advocacy, I am wearing my UN pin today because I believe that it's important to be where the nations of the world gather to solve the world's problems. And that's what the UN is. It is not a perfect institution. It has all kinds of problems. But we need to be there to be salt and light in that arena. And if we're not there, then our voice doesn't get heard. So I think it's important to be there. The big area I work with is the Human Rights Council. It holds sessions 3 times a year in Geneva. There's also other mechanisms that we engage with in the Geneva setting. But the Human Rights Council is the most important. Next slide, please. And out of that, the big area is universal periodic review. Every state comes up for review every 4.5 years. Wow, okay, so nobody escapes this process, not even North Korea. So next slide, please. So the UPR process is very interesting because there are specific ways that NGOs like the WEA can make submissions into the process. This is not just a closed government system. We have the opportunity to submit reports. Then the state itself, they have a national consultation process in the country. There's a number of different processes of written submissions and oral hearings that culminate in a UPR report that is accepted at the UN. And that means your country accepts certain recommendations on human rights. And that gives you an opportunity to come back to your government and say, you agreed to do this. You agreed that you were going to take up this issue and resolve it. So you could call on your government coming out of this international process. You could flip through the next 3 fairly quickly. These are just some examples of some recent submissions we've made, so you can see what they look like, nice and fancy with logos on them. But we've made submissions on Eritrea, Kenya, and Libya in the last year. And so you may get an email from me when your country is coming up for review asking if you want to work with us on this. Next slide, please. So how can we work together? Well, we can assist in report writing. We can also do some training and coaching on how to research and write reports in your country. We can connect you, if you're interested, with a national alliance that is doing successful advocacy. There are several around the world. I mentioned the Evangelical Fellowship of Canada. They have like a staff of 3 people that works on advocacy, and they would be happy to talk to you about how they do what they do well. We can also hold side events to particularly focus on an issue in your country if that is something that is important and of interest to you. Next slide, please. So this next one is a photo of a side event we held in February with our brother from the Turkish Alliance, and on the other side of me is Sri Lanka and Serbia, and we were talking about issues to do with church registration and how that's used in a discriminatory way in many countries. Next slide, please. So, and that's not all. There's other Geneva-based advocacy that we can engage in, complaints to special rapporteurs, there's other human rights monitoring situations, and also the UN Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, who has a specific person called the Faith for Rights Initiative at the bottom. So we engage with these people a lot. So if you are having a particular issue in your country, please talk to me. Next slide, please. Now, we also do some other kinds of advocacy. I mentioned my colleague who makes dinner for diplomats. We have diplomatic engagement. There's all these great ambassadors just hanging out in Geneva and New York, and they have the ear of their government. So if we can work through diplomatic engagement, sometimes what happens behind the scenes in quiet diplomacy can succeed where public mechanisms can't. There's also regional advocacy, and I will say that the European Evangelical Alliance has a part-time advocate at the EU, at the European Union. I know some people have talked about having advocacy at the African Union, and there's possibilities for being able to go forward with that. We need coordination amongst all of the different people doing advocacy, saying the things at the same time. Next slide, please. Then there's other organizations that we can partner with. One that I have dealt with on and off is called IPP4, which is parliamentarians that are committed to freedom of religion or belief. So they're not the top level people, but they're in the political system. And I know there's been training of politicians in Africa to make them more effective. So there are already at least 5 countries that have groups that are started particularly on freedom of religion or belief. There are also international religious freedom roundtables, which are being planted like churches around the world. They started in the US, but they got a big Templeton grant for 3 years to start these in different countries. And the first International Religious Freedom Summit is happening right here in Nairobi next month. So it's great to see some new initiatives in Africa that you might be able to engage with, something for you to talk about through the AEA meetings while we're here. So, final slide, please. So I issue the challenge of, can African Evangelical Alliance harness the political power of evangelicals in some African nations to advocate for evangelicals in other African nations? So this is something I hadn't talked about before. I was talking about you speaking to your own governments, but what about speaking to your government about a situation happening somewhere else? Can we advocate in Ghana for those persecuted in Nigeria? Can we advocate in Kenya for those persecuted in Eritrea or South Sudan? Something to think about. Can this be part of unity for transformation in Africa? I know there's a Q&A. Do you want us to stay up here? Oh, you've got a final bit here. Okay.
Yes, thank you. Friends,